Hello, I'm Andrew Locken. This is our class project, and so basically the ghost map is talking about the Cholera virus, and that relates directly to biology because especially in bio lab, we just did the bacteria lab this previous week here, and it just shows how bacteria spread, and I think it closely relates to this book. So for the chapter 1 summary, the book begins by portraying a nightmarish scene in a not too distant past, based in London in the middle of the 19th century, or 1854. The author depicts these underclass group of people as bone pickers, rag gatherers, pure finders, deredermen, mead larks, sewer hunters, dustmen, night soilmen, bunters, toshers, and shoremen. They all made their living dealing with waste in London at the time. London was deemed to be the richest city in the world at the time. There had become an entire class of people who were poor and had to scavenge to survive. These scavengers became most of the most important people in London at the time because they were getting rid of trash and in some cases even recycling it. Like most socioeconomic classes, these scavengers had their own system of rank and level of importance. For example, city landlords paid night soilmen a good wage to harvest excrement. The chapter also discusses the rampant spreading of cholera through the city's water pumps. People were starting to die more rapidly due to this spreading disease. To summarize the chapter in short, this is all relating to the growing pains that London was experiencing, how they were not properly handling their waste. Cesspools were being created, which were assumingly leaching into the surrounding area, and more than likely were also infecting the water supply for the city, hence the water pumps. The balance of life and resources has become so skewed and abused that there was a serious problem as a direct result. The chapter 2 summary goes as follows. In this chapter, it talks about how Lewis Child began vomiting and began to experience the effects of cholera. That's how the chapter opens up. Although this chapter doesn't talk explicitly about cholera, the author uses a strong sense of foreboding. The author also implies that the water pump is the main source of the cholera outbreak. The author goes on to talk about the effects of cholera, such as diarrhea, which in turn could spread the cholera to other people if the excrement wasn't handled properly. Looking at the cholera bacteria, people have just thought the process that it was evil, that the bacteria itself was evil, whereas the bacteria is just trying to meet its requirements for life. It doesn't really have concern for morality or, things of that nature. The chapter ends with people coming to the realization that they cannot do anything to help or prevent the spread of the infection, and they can't do anything to help the people who are infected. And it ends with this symbolizing of a flag in the middle of the street. So this closely relates to the biology because we're talking about bacteria, we're talking about diseases and viruses and how they spread, and this is at a time period where they couldn't prevent that. They didn't have the medicine, at least not at this stage of the book. They didn't have the medicine to handle that kind of outbreak. And yeah, that's how it relates, and that's the summary of the first 2 chapters.
Okay, hi, my name is Michael, and I'm doing chapters 3 to 4 on the ghost map. So on chapters 3 to 4, we're investigating the deaths on Sakaro, the neighborhood that's infected with cholera. And Jon Snow, he's tripping out. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's like, what's going on with all these deaths? So then he starts formulating the theory, the beginnings of the waterborne theory. He starts noticing the death, and the death count is mostly, it's a highly dense area, which is the Broad Street water pump area. And what's very fascinating about this epidemic is that the Broad Street water pump has the best quality of water according to the neighborhood's locals, but most people appear to be dying because of this water. Now, what's confusing is there's never been a waterborne disease. So his theory and his thoughts are conflicting with his own previous experiences. And as he goes through the neighborhood, he starts collecting the data of the families who have been vaporized and liquidated by by the cholera. Yeah. And now as we move on to the next chapter, Henry Whitehead, the other guy who's the local town OG who knows everything about the town, he starts to think about Jon Snow's investigations, and he's wondering if the waterborne theory and all the data could be reasonable. So he starts to make his number 1 priority is to shoot down Jon Snow's theory of the waterborne hypothesis. And as he's going to collect data from the information, as he's going around the town to collect information and look up if the theory and the hypothesis of Jon Snow is correct, Jon Snow has come to the conclusion that most of the deaths that have happened in these couple of days, which have been 100, have been highly densely around the Broad Street water pump. So in conclusion, in this chapter, Jon Snow is starting to formulate the infamous waterborne theory, and that cholera has been transported by water. And Henry Whitehead, his opposition but future ally, is the first one to challenge this theory, and his goal is to take it down.
Yeah. I'm Katie, and I'm introducing the events of what happened through chapters 7 and 8 in the Ghost Map. Okay, so during these chapters, the community and citizens of Soho have a meeting to discuss the cholera outbreak. In the meeting, Jon Snow spoke about his waterborne theory and insisted that the community remove the Broad Street water pump. However, most of the community and townspeople weren't very ecstatic about this idea. Although this wasn't the case, although Jon Snow was very persuasive during the meeting and convinced the board and the townspeople to remove the Broad Street water pump. After the pump was removed, deaths continued for another week or so, but eventually died down. A lot of the townspeople still weren't happy about what happened, including Sir Benjamin Hall. Sir Benjamin Hall commissioned an investigation to the contributing factors of how the disease spread. He took into consideration of Snow's waterborne theory, but never fully embraced the idea. Another person who was very upset about what happened of the removal of the water pump was Henry Whitehead. Henry Whitehead was just another town local who invested a lot of his time into figuring out the cholera epidemic. Henry Whitehead also did another experiment where he investigated and questioned men and townspeople of the town. He learned from this investigation that children were dying faster than the elderly. However, this was because the elderly were more secluded and didn't interact with a lot of the people in the town. And then the children were mandated to take the water, to go to the well every day and get water. And they eventually ended up contributing the disease. After this, another guy named Edmund Cooper is a very smart scientist who comes to the town, and he believes that the outbreak has to be related to corpses. So Edmund Cooper creates a map. In this, he learns after Edmund Cooper's map, Jon Snow creates another map too. After viewing this map, he learns that a lot of the deaths are very in close proximity to the water well. And because of this proves Jon Snow's theory to be true, that the disease was being spread through the water well. And eventually, London's government built a new sewer system, and a pub was named after Jon Snow in Soho. That's currently still running today. And that is the conclusion of chapter 8 and 7.
I'm doing chapter 5 and 6 of the Ghost Map. In chapter 5, the cholera looked like it was dwindling down because people began to feel better, but some still were dying off. Once some of the people started actually drinking heavy amounts of water from the Broad Street pump, they started feeling somewhat better. Edwin Chadwick pushed the Public Health Act of 1848 to clean up the sewer system, but it overall caused problems because it caused Thames River to become a big waste pool. This ended up contributing to the outbreak of cholera because he ultimately dirtied a lot of the landowners' drinking water. This chapter also touches on the miasma theory. The miasma theory exemplifies the concept of overdetermination. In other words, an idea that persuades because of many small compatible arguments rather than any single really convincing point. The miasma theory pretty much broke down on itself, making it easy for people to see all of its weaknesses. Chapter 6 brought out an understanding to Jon Snow about Mr. G's death and its connection to the consumption of water. After a lot of testing and researching, Snow found out that the Lions Brewery employees have not died from cholera, possibly because they had been paid partially in beer, but also had their own water line and well. But looking at the Ellie Brothers factory, people became sick, possibly because they had 2 large tubs of water coming from the Broad Street pump. These 2 chapters connect to our class readings by similar events of allopatric speciation. For example, the river separated both of the factories and their employees, but the sickness only stayed to the Ellie Brothers factory and their employees. Thus, one portion of the population vanquished and the other survived. This is due to the physical separation of the water sources.
To his Robert. Fucking shit, dude. Can we just edit this out?